Thank you for listening to the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast with host Clara and Jimmy Hinton. If you're new to the podcast, please subscribe and share so you never miss an episode. Search for us on your favorite podcast app, or you can find the podcast on jimmyhinton.org and findingahealingplace.com. Please rate our show, subscribe, and share so we can spread the word. If you would like to support us and get exclusive rewards, go to patreon.com/speakingout. Find the tier that best fits you and join as a patron of the podcast. Now let's get into the show. Welcome to this week's podcast with hosts Jimmy Hinton
and Jimmy's mom, Clara.
Thank you again to our patrons who helped make this podcast happen. We just had a lovely conversation on Zoom with some of our patrons over the weekend, and it was really cool to get to interact with them and get to have coffee time and hang out with them.
We did. That was wonderful. It was very relaxed, and I felt like just a nice hour together.
Yeah.
It really was.
It was nice.
Yeah, it was beautiful.
Okay, so this episode, we titled this Abusers Are Hunters. And we want to delve right into this because we believe that the term abuser is very inadequate. It's a broad term. I think it's too broad of a term. And when people hear abuser, that can bring up all kinds of things in their mind, anything from, mild maltreatment to, more severe types of abuse. It's just too broad.
I think often when we hear the word abuser, we think too of verbal abuse only. Mm-hmm. Lots of times, or we switch and we think of a husband who is abusing his wife in that, he's slapping her or hitting her, which that's horrific. Mm-hmm. But we don't think of specifically a child being abused. And that's what we want to focus in more today.
Well, and sexual predators too, especially for some reason.
Yes.
In the church, especially, leaders often clean up the language, and reporters do this too, when they use terms like inappropriate relationship. It was not a relationship. For that child, they can't have a sexual relationship with an adult, grown, disgusting human who's hunting them.
Right.
Intentionally, targeting them intentionally, that is not a relationship. So, when you hear terms like relationship, when you hear abusers referred to as brother, I've lost count of how many times I've heard this in the church. When they reframe, I use the term abuser. I'm going to start using the term hunter because that's what they are. That's more specific to what they do and who they are. But they'll soften that language 98% of the time. And they'll say, well, this brother, sure, they had this inappropriate relationship. Try again.
Or
it wasn't a relationship.
They were young and immature, and it just happened.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, it didn't just happen.
Right.
And I think that's why terminology is really important. It's important to get the terminology correct because when we reframe things and rephrase things, we miss the mark completely, and we're allowing these hunters back into the church. So I'm going to read a quote from a book that this is an excellent, excellent book. It's called Eyes of a Pedophile, Detecting Child Predators by Betty J. Kuffel, Kuffel. She's a medical doctor, and for some reason, she took interest in this case of, what's the guy's name? He went by it was a famous case in Montana. The guy was a pedophile. He also killed his victims, and I think he cannibalized them too, or some of them. But the famous name that this case is known by is Nathaniel Bar-Jonah. His actual name is David Brown. She took an interest in this case and actually started interviewing him and talking to him. And, she would visit him at prison. She would write letters back and forth. So, the research is invaluable. And this book is just written really, really well. Very readable book. But she says this: as pedophiles stalk victims, sexual fantasies dominate their thoughts. Like other hunters, they target specific prey. Pedophiles hunt children. And then she goes on, to achieve sexual arousal and gratification, these predators choose children of a specific age, appearance, and gender with the thrill of acting out fantasies undetected. They live among us in plain view, often working close to children. In positions of power, they integrate themselves to parents and groom children to trust them. Most attackers are not strangers. She hit the nail exactly on the head.
Exactly.
This is not accidental. Even the quote-unquote preference that they have in their victims, hair color, hair length, eye color, skin tone, all that stuff, those are not preferences. Those are very specific, methodical ways of seeking out what they want to destroy.
I think of there was an incident where we talked about many, many, many podcasts ago where you were in the mall and you saw the guy by the merry-go-round and he had the carousel. And I'm thinking, these people know what they want. They know what age, what gender.
Like a hunter.
Yes. Like
hunters, they will avoid certain kills, even if they have an animal, a deer. Say they're hunting deer, they could have an animal sitting in front of them.
Yep.
Laying in front of them. In plain view and easy shot, and they'll avoid the kill.
I just talked to a hunter who did that. He said, that's not the one I wanted.
They want the trophy.
He said, yep. He said, I saw the big buck earlier in the day. He said, I didn't want this buck. And I'm thinking, so you're even that choosy that
Absolutely, they are.
Yes. So when we think in those terms, it's easier to understand the depth of sin, the depth of corruption, the depth of the way an abuser, a hunter thinks. And when we whitewash with these words, they're almost so generic.
I mean,
so
even
generic
abuser, it's too generic.
Loses the meaning of what's being done to these children. Yes.
I mean, think about. I know this is hard to do, and I don't want this to be too triggering for survivors who are listening. But I'm not telling you anything that you don't know.
Right.
But if you think about what lengths they go to stalk their victims, and that's also another reason why I reject the term grooming as the primary thing that abusers are doing. They're not dressing up their victims and grooming them. And grooming is always a positive thing in every dictionary. Grooming is for the betterment of somebody.
Right.
It's to dress them. It's to comb their hair. It's to
That's what I think
pretty
of.
them up, put makeup on. It's to make them better.
Yeah.
Grooming is always used in a positive sense in every dictionary that exists. Grooming is always framed in a positive way. That's one reason why I reject that as primarily what they're doing. Primarily what they're doing is testing. They test their victims and the adults to find out what they can get away with. How far can they push the boundaries? How well can they sit in the blinds and blend in and not have other people see them? How good can they put the scent on to blend in and camouflage themselves to blend in? How well can they stalk their victims? So it's not about grooming them and dressing them up and, kind of leading them along.
It's a whole different meaning to it, doesn't it?
Right.
By the changing of a word.
It's seeking them out.
It really does.
So,
yes.
and the term hunter really puts into perspective the thrill behind it for the abuser. And make no mistake, abusers aren't haphazardly, tiptoeing after their victim and accidentally getting caught up in the emotion of sexual arousal.
No.
That's not what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
I would argue never, but let's be a little bit conservative. Almost never. And I would say almost always, if not always, the abuser has this switch inside of them, this DNA programming that gets them excited and thrilled for the hunt. And that's from start to finish.
Mm-hmm.
That's from planning
Mm-hmm.
to thinking, where am I going to hunt? Where's the best hunting grounds? Where's the best patch of woods? Stalking their victims. Look at what hunters do. If anybody hunts,
right?
They go
walk
out
through
with,
different
they
wooded
spotlight
areas.
fields. They know where the
fix their
deer
tree stand
go.
where they can see better,
Yeah.
see out over the field. They watch, they wait.
They know where the trails
study
are.
for really some study for months, beginning in the summer. You're right. They know where the trails are. They follow the path.
They know what time the deer come out.
They put their cameras up, heaven
Right.
forbid now, and watch when the deer cross. They want to time it right, the whole thing.
Yeah.
Very, very precise.
Mm-hmm.
Very rarely will you hear a hunter going out in an unknown wooded area to hunt a deer. And I just talked to some men who came back from a hunting trip. And I said, how do you hunt on this mountain? They were out in Wyoming. How do you do that when you don't know the trails and all? They said, oh, we have a guide with us. We have maps, we have guides. We study that before we go out. We study the maps. And I thought, oh.
And the point, the great point is that they don't spend thousands of dollars to go out west to hunt and do it haphazardly.
Unprepared. Right.
Yeah, they're not unprepared at all. They know exactly what
prepared.
they're doing.
Which I didn't know that.
Yeah, even in unfamiliar territory.
I thought part of the thrill would be to go in a new place and they said, no. We hire someone to take us there to the spot. We've studied it before. We've studied the terrain. We know the weather. We know everything.
Yeah. I've seen some of those companies advertise and they'll say guaranteed to see elk or whatever, whatever you're hunting, guaranteed to see it. Well, there's good reason for that. It's not that they stock these places and fence them in so that they're captive, because that's not fun for hunters.
Right.
It's that the guides, they study the trails and they know what time they come out and where they come out, and they know the patterns of the animals.
It's interesting. One of our church members years ago got so excited about hunting, and he would not just camouflage himself, but he would purchase deer urine to put all over himself.
Lots of hunters
and
do it.
I'm thinking, wow, that's so he would blend in. So he would, and when you think about these child hunters, they do the same thing. They're expert about it. They are experts.
Well, and there's, once you know how to hunt well, and some people are just naturally gifted at that mentality. I'm not. For me, the learning curve would be tremendous. I'm not a hunter. I've never hunted.
You've
I've
never
just
had
never
an interest, though.
Right.
That's and when you think of it that way.
So for me to get into it, I doubt that I would ever get
to that extent. Never.
A really nice buck or whatever.
Right.
I just because I don't know how to find them, and it would take forever to learn.
Yeah.
But for people who've been doing it forever and who are really good at it, they go out and always on the first day of hunting season, they come back with their trophy buck.
They come back with it, yeah.
Because they know what they're doing.
They do.
So that's the point. And I think we really need to change, or maybe I'm just going to do it out of preference. I'm going to change the terminology and start calling them, instead of abusers, I'm going to call them hunters.
I like that a lot.
Because that's what they do.
That's very descriptive. You're right. Yeah.
And I'm not going to apologize for it.
No.
They're not accidental abusers who just fell into a bad circumstance. And
I think often too, Jimmy, we try to think, well, they had a bad childhood. They were abused as a child. And so, we try to do that with alcoholism or different verbal abuse, someone who beats their wife. Well, their father beat their mother, so it carried over. Well, we have to break the cycle. Well, I'm not so sure that's true with hunters.
I think while you're bringing that up, I'm going to read something from Anna Salter's book.
Okay.
Predators, pedophiles, rapists, and other sex offenders, who they are, how they operate, and how we can protect ourselves and our children. That's Dr. Anna Salter. This is an old book, 2003. But it's a classic.
I love that book, by the way. That's got,
hands down, the most
immense information.
Most helpful book on pedophilia that's out there.
Yes.
To date, I think.
Right.
The research is just invaluable. So she says, it's a subtitle within a chapter. So what's the answer? Why do offenders molest children? She said, we only know this much. There's a subgroup of child molesters who molest children simply because they're sexually attracted to them. There are others who molest because they're antisocial or even psychopathic and simply feel entitled. There are still others who use children for the intimacy they're too timid or impaired to obtain from adults. And there are others who molest for reasons we don't understand at all. But make no mistake, whether men molest because of sexual preference or for other reasons, their compulsiveness can be extraordinary. Take, for an example, a minister who had sexually abused his grandchildren. Then she goes on and she quotes from him. So this is what the guy said. This is what the hunter said. I didn't suspend my conscience. I carried it right into the action with me. I think in my own personal view, this is part of a compulsive pattern. You do things. You don't always justify the action, but you carry the consequences of the action into the action, and you do it despite or in spite of the known consequences. I suppose that being a devout religious person, if I had believed with all of my mind and heart that the earth was going to open up and swallow me up in hell, I would have went ahead and done it anyway. Wow. And then Dr. Salter goes on and says this. She said, I remember distinctly my reaction when he said this. The hair stood up on the back of my neck. I understood for the first time what we were up against. If a man who truly believes in hell would be willing to go there in exchange for the chance to molest a child, and here's where I'm going to correct Dr.
I have chills.
Here's where I'm going to correct Dr. Salter. It's not for a chance to molest a child. It's for a chance to molest his own grandchild. She says this problem had a persistence and a compulsiveness that few outside the drug addiction world could appreciate. Whatever the reasons people develop such a fixation, it tends to be chronic and resistant to change. The people who have such patterns are not a small number, more like an invisible army that cannot be recognized on the street. And then she goes on, I'm going to skip down to the end of this last paragraph. She said, no one has all the answers about how to stop them or even why all of them do what they do. But at least we should have the decency as a people to stop making excuses for them.
I love that final word.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah. Yes.
Stop making excuses.
Yes. Yeah.
This is not a relationship that they had with the child. This is not a slip up. It's not a screw up. It's not an accident. It's not falling into sin. It's not a temptation.
Fault. It's not. Yeah.
Right. It's not. It's not the upbringing that they had. It's none of those. It's a hunter has stalked a very specific victim and has gone in for the kill for the thrill of it.
Right.
Period.
A very intentional act.
An evil act.
Right. And doesn't care. And I like that she put that in there, that even if hell would swallow this person up,
I would have done it anyway.
Would have done it anyway. That's how determined.
And her point too, this is what we're up against.
Yeah.
So if there's any church leader out there who's listening to this, guys, I get so much heat from church leaders who think I'm some quack who's out here who you're just damaged from having your own dad abuse kids and that's changed your perspective and this and that. No, this is based on almost a decade of intense research. This is nothing personal whatsoever. I don't have a personal axe to grind, period. I simply want to understand predators, how they operate, and how to stop them. And we've got to match our terminology to meet what these people are actually doing. They are hunters. They are hunters. I'm going to read a quote from, this was actually a personal visit that I had with my dad in prison. So people ask me a lot, is he remorseful? I don't even hesitate. No, he's not remorseful. Not in the least bit. He's never been remorseful. Has he been upset that he got caught? Yeah. Is he remorseful for what he did, for the damage he caused, for the years and years and years of harm that he inflicted on dozens and dozens and dozens of victims? Is he remorseful? No, not at all. Do I feel sorry? Do I feel bad that he's in prison? Not at all. He is exactly where he belongs, locked up in a cage because he's an animal. He deserves to be in prison, not as a punishment so much as to protect kids from him harming them again, because he would. He told me,
I know that.
If I were to get out of prison tomorrow, I would produce a victim tomorrow. He told me that.
It is in our minds, because our minds are not thinking like the hunter. It's difficult for us to process that.
Yeah.
Very difficult.
Because we think they're wrestling with sin and they're like us, like they're struggling.
Well, when I think of prison and being confined in prison and for doing a wrongful action or many wrongful actions, I think of weeping and crying and thrashing and separation.
And vomiting.
Separation
Self-loathing.
from family and those I love and wanting to make things right, that to where I really, my tears become blood. My sweat becomes blood. That's not so with him.
No.
I watched him with my own eyes. I'll never forget that moment when he stood before the judge in the courtroom. There was no remorse.
Yeah, he propped his feet up on the desk during recess.
And smiling.
Yeah, he looked back at us and smiled with his feet propped up as he's shackled.
Just, and those things are hard for us to put in our minds because our minds are not hunting children. We're not geared that way.
No.
But here this person is, yes, he needs to be there to keep children safe. Because just like the wild animal that would go out and kill a child, and we've seen it, people think they can pet these animals and whatnot. You let them loose, they'll kill you.
Yeah.
They'll kill you because that's who they are.
Right.
That's what they are. That's what he is. And he said it. You know.
Well, this was 2 years ago. So this is not
after he's been in prison for a while.
Yeah, he had been in prison.
Several
Let's
years.
see, he was locked up in 2011. This was in 2018.
7 years later.
Yeah, 7 years later, this is what's on his mind.
Yeah.
This is him describing to me what it's like to abuse his victims, because I asked him about techniques. Did you learn these techniques to abuse these kids and to keep it all hidden? Abuse in plain sight.
Right.
You abused the victims in front of their parents.
Right.
Did you learn these techniques yourself, or did you study them from, other people, other abusers? Here was his answer. My techniques were learned early on, and it was all driven by curiosity. The high that you get from abusing a child and getting away with it is indescribable. This is him describing producing victims, some of them his own children.
There is no thought for the victim when he's talking here.
No, he's excited talking about it.
And for him to describe that to his son, even when you think of the depth of he had no compassion for the pain that you've been through.
Because he doesn't care.
No. So I want people to understand.
No hunter cares.
I want people to understand that these are not compassionate, kind people who made a mistake.
No.
At all, or who slipped into sin. Not at all. It's intentional. It's studied, and keep going, Jimmy. Yeah.
So he goes on. He says, it's like you have your own little personal pharmacy, and you happen to be the pharmacist who is in complete control of how much of each drug you get. It's one thing to abuse a child. Now listen to this. It's one thing to abuse a child for the sexual thrill. This is how he's describing his victims. Not, my God, what have I done?
No, not at all.
I didn't want to do these things. That's not who I am. I got something came over me.
There's a certain
he's not describing
here.
It that way.
There's a certain pride in him saying that this is
every victim is a trophy.
Yep, exactly. Yep.
And he's describing what it was like to get his trophy.
Actually, you can tell he's getting thrilled.
Oh, you should have seen the look on his face.
I'm glad I didn't, to be honest.
As he was telling, he was smiling. I mean, he was loving it. And he goes on. He says, it's one thing to abuse a child for the sexual thrill, but if you can do it in front of other people, the high is much better. Stop and think about that. It's not enough to strip the innocence of a prepubescent child and to humiliate them and to abuse them in the worst possible way. That's not enough for him. And he's excited. If the thrill of it, the adrenaline rush. It's like I'm in a pharmacy and I'm the pharmacist. I'm in complete control of every drug that I get. He's describing
I, me. I'm in charge.
He's getting energized by it.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
And then he goes on, he ends it. Well, it doesn't end it, but I'm going to end it here. He said, you learn early on that one of the easiest things in the world is to abuse a child in front of adults. So that's how he's describing it. He's a hunter. Abusers are hunters, period. They stalk their victims. They don't groom them. They do. I'll rephrase that. There is some grooming that goes on, but primarily that's not what they're doing. They test their victims, and then they begin this process of stalking and dressing them down as far as how they're going to get into the blinds in plain sight.
Right.
They want to do it in front of other people.
Yeah. Well, obviously.
This is not about isolation. This is not about messing up. This is not about inappropriate relationships. It's none of that. This is nothing more than glorified hunting, where they know that they know what the end is.
They're going in
for the child.
Yeah,
they're going in for the kill.
Going in for the kill.
They know what they want. They know how they're going to get it. They've studied their victims.
And I think that's a key word, Jimmy, studied. It wasn't just an action that happened. It wasn't that they had a fantasy that they may have thought of 5 years ago and then it played out. That's not what's going on. The hunter person who abuses a child, who steals their innocence, who hurts them, harms them in the most horrific way, has studied how to do it. Sat and studied technique, position, how far they can go to get away with it, how thrilled they will get, has studied the whole thing.
How to keep them quiet, how to cover their tracks. He even talks about, if we get caught, it's not a big deal. It's, in fact, it only emboldens us to try more brazen methods if we get caught. They want to get caught. They invite
part of this thrill. Part of this thrill. Yeah.
But you brought up before, this phrase that he used, you learn early on. And you said, part of learning is studying.
Studying.
This is not accidental.
Not at all. You choose the subject and you study it to become expert in it. So he chose, the hunter, not just him, but the hunters, they've chosen the subject is, I'm going to harm a child.
Yeah.
And I'm going
to... For the thrill of it.
For the thrill of it. And I'm going to do it in front of other adults.
Yeah. For the thrill
of it. For a bigger thrill.
Right.
Yeah. For a bigger thrill.
So, we need to wipe out of our mentality that this is accidental, that we need to bring them in. And I'm going to finish with this. This was I'm going to read part of an email that I got from somebody when I brought up that they have a tier 3 sexually violent predator in their church. And I had caught wind that the leadership was covering this up. So I addressed the leadership and I was like, you really need to inform your church because they're finding out and they deserve to know that there's a tier 3 sexually violent predator who's right now producing more victims.
And I really
he's a hunter.
I like replacing.
You have a hunter in your congregation.
Yes, I like that very much. That's more descriptive. More true to fact.
So this was just one of the lines from this church elder in his response to me. He says, "We are seeking to do the best for all in our care." And clearly he's talking about his compassion for the abuser in the contest, for the hunter. And he says, "We do not require our members to, quote unquote, wear their past sin on a label or announce it to the world." Not the church. You see the hyperbole here, the exaggeration.
Oh, yeah.
Jimmy, who do you think you are saying that, you're better than other people and that we should have him announce his sins to the world? I'm not saying announce it to the world. I'm saying tell your church that you have a hunter in the pews who has produced many victims, federal crimes, felonies, and he spent time in prison. So he goes on, we don't require them to announce it to the world unless they choose to do so. I'm sure this hunter is going to volunteer.
Right, exactly. Yes.
He said, "We do ask that they live responsibly and are willingly accountable." Isn't that cute?
Not really.
They're going to willingly live responsibly.
Going to sit and go up to the preacher or the elder and say, "I was sitting on the pew and I spotted this child, and the thoughts of molesting that child passed through my mind, and now I want to become really good friends with their family so they can wiggle my way in and get that child in a room with the parents and and destroy."
This self-governance, we're asking them to willingly be, what was the term he used? This just made me so angry.
Responsible and
we ask that they live responsibly and are willingly accountable.
No, not going to happen. Not going to happen. I think, Jimmy, that we've whitewashed, we as a society, for so long that we've accepted the whitewashing of what a predator/hunter is. We've softened it because we're taught to, God forbid, not judge. And this is not judgment. This is not casting judgment on anyone. This is telling what that person is.
Yeah, it's how they think. It's how they operate. It's what they did.
And we talked about that in a few podcasts back, that person created their title that they wear. They created the title of hunter. They studied. They were emboldened themselves, and that's who they are. And there's a pride in that. So we need to act responsibly and be accountable for using the right term and no longer whitewash it. I think it's time we embolden our language to match the actions of these evil people.
Absolutely.
And they are evil to the core.
Yeah. I mean, we absolutely have to call them hunters because that's what they are.
Yes.
We can use the term wolf, and I like that term
I
too.
do too.
They are hunter wolves.
Yes, I like that.
Or
that
wolf
is
hunters.
Best.
Well, they're not wolf hunters because they're not hunting wolves. They are the wolf.
They are the wolf. They are the wolf.
So, I think I'm going to stop using the term abuser because it's too generic.
Right.
And I'm going to call them hunters.
I'm going to begin using the word hunter also. I think that's far more descriptive.
I think it's fair.
Yes. Oh, I'm not worried about being fair, actually, to these people, if you want to know the truth. They lost that privilege of having us be fair to them.
Yeah.
When they cross that line.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So abusers are hunters. So I guess we'll leave you with this truth bomb. Let's call it as it is.
Right.
Start using that terminology if you're so inclined, and don't apologize for it. When church leaders want to, or the media or whoever, when they want to soften the language and talk about relationships and messing up and falling into temptation and all this sanitizing that they do of the language, let's strip that all away and expose them for who they are, for the hunters who they are, and just say, you know what? No, I reject that. They are a hunter. They hunt the vulnerable for the thrill of it. We'll leave you with that. We thank you for tuning into this episode, and we'll catch you next round.
Thanks again for listening to today's episode. Thank you to our patrons who make the podcast possible. If you found it helpful, please follow on Spreaker and search for the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast in your favorite podcast app. Be sure to hit subscribe and rate the show. If you believe in what we do, consider supporting the podcast by becoming a patron, and check out the cool rewards our patrons receive. Share with your friends and tell the world. Join us in speaking out on sex abuse so we can change the tides and prevent abuse.